right, so this morning we're going to talk about chapter 14 entitled Capture. So I want to point out from the get go that the music to this song, like I like the music and all. There's some pretty cool riffs in it, but it kind of starts out, especially maybe the first half of the song, as being a little, I don't want to use the word whimsical, but it doesn't sound as serious. And then there's a progression that kind of starts in the like after the first verse or whatever you want to call it, that makes it kind of change tone and sound a little more serious. And then there's some like breakdown sections and all that gets into this metal core sort of vibe to it. And to me it definitely signifies a serious shift in the tonality of the entire song. And I'm not going to say that was deliberate when I wrote the song, but I think it really pays it really does the song justice of like kind of what lyrically is going on. And then like after that it goes back into this less serious kind of vibe. I mean, whole time I'm doing these mostly screaming, growling, whatever vocals. um I mean, there is some singing like in the middle section, but um yeah, the music goes from not serious to pretty serious to not serious again. And so, like, going into that, the literal meaning of what's going on in the song, the protagonist, not long after the Aurora character has awakened, he is essentially bum rushed by some bandits from the village. And the villagers, you would think, would be happy that this woman has awakened, but they're actually kind of freaked out, and they basically look at this protagonist like he's a witch or a warlock or something. um, and so they capture him. That's exactly what happens. um, but when I wrote this song, I wanted it to be part of this story and about like him, kind of reflecting on his past again. But I wanted it to have some very clear, like, praise and worship implications to it. So when he says at the very beginning, capture my heart, I cried to the heavens, is about it's it's him saying, capture my heart, God, which is something that, like, in my church circles that I grew up in, it was kind of a declaration that a lot of us made as individuals of, God, please capture my heart, prove yourself real to me, just capture me. And I can't remember, gosh, there's a famous poet, famous poem. I mean, I remember we even studied it in a unit in high school, but I can't remember who it was. But this essentially um, has a line in it that says, um, "You ravish me, oh God," or I mean, it's like this famous poem that is directed towards God, and he specifically uses the the word ravish. And I remember like some pretty well known praise and worship song that, we used to do in church and youth group and stuff, back in the day that, use the term ravish my heart or something like that. And it got to the place that I was like, is that really something you actually want to say? Because, like, the literal meaning of ravish, it's kind of twofold. Like, goes back to like kind of this like military language of like sacking a town or a kingdom or whatever, and just like breaking down walls. And you know like honestly too, there's implication in there of like rape. And so like we would sing this praise and worship song in our church services growing up and be saying, like essentially, God, I want you to like ravish me. And I was like, I mean, do people actually know what this language means? Is this something that we want to pray? But even saying like capture my heart, now I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all, of course not. But the point that I wanted to get across in this song is like, what if you pray this and it's kind of lackadaisically or just not as serious? You just sort of say it in passing, and then all of a sudden it happens. And what I mean by that too is going back once again to ideas of suffering, because just the way I guess human nature works, and when it comes to spirituality and Christianity, is like when times are good, we want to think, oh, God's really been working on my behalf and doing all these good things, and he's capturing my heart. But the reality of it is he tends to capture our attention, captures our hearts when we're dealing with suffering, when we're dealing with things that we have no control over. And so that's what he's kind of praying throughout this song of, capture my heart, I cried to Jesus, because deep cries to deep of a bride to be, this woman whose gaze awakens my every terror. Um, I arrived from a war divorced from all that's good, going back to his past as a soldier and recognizing that it was because of that, like he was divorced from goodness or whatever. Um, and yet here a groom handsomer than my rugged charm woos a bride more lovely than I deserve. So we're talking about Jesus again, talking about his church. Capture my mind, I cried a Father. Capture my mind, I cried a Holy Spirit. Um, and it says in that, for which is easier, a sawn in half martyrdom or living with terror ahead? And sawn in half martyrdom's reference to the martyrdom of the prophet Isaiah. Um, so even that's dealing with like prophetic language. Um, and when it gets serious, um, I pretty much growled in there. I arrived from the grave ready for a wedding, yet bandits sequester with a standoff after her awakening. So, that's the explanation right there, that he's in like a Mexican standoff against these bandits from the village. Um, how they're gnarling, how I'm but a sorcerer and I want to hide, but I need to be found. And it's that goes back into praise and worship language too of, um, I was lost but now found, was blind but now see. Just saying I want to hide, I want to, retreat within, or whatever, but maybe I actually need to be found. And maybe instead of just standing off against the idea of suffering, that maybe perhaps I have to just not really embrace it, because I think that's kind of a masochism of sorts, like a self masochism, but just accepting that, like, it is just part of reality. Um, and so, more of the growling and just the seriousness of the situation. Um, he makes reference to the Wheel of Fortune, and um, watching it with his grandmother's dog transfixed to the TV, like the actual TV show Wheel of Fortune, which, I'd watch game shows or whatever with my nana, back when she was still living here in Greensboro, and before she passed away, um, back this past fall. We would watch TV and stuff together, but it's kind of like, I guess, my shout out to my nana and everything. But the, like, Wheel of Fortune is actually, um, this, like, old concept of, the what I say after this, of the villagers preaching about a, rota fortunae, which, so, like, in, like, Roman myth, there's this, is not exactly like a goddess per se, but she's more like the personification, if you want to call her that, of, like, fortune, or fate. Um, and that she's like blindfolded, and you can find this, like, in some, like, Renaissance artwork and sketches, that she, in the artwork, for this, song, like, there's like a statue in this, like, courtroom, because, like, they capture him but also, like, bring him to, like, a courtroom to try him for his being a sorcerer, um, because they don't understand why this woman has awakened, when he was there. Um, but, like, yeah, there's, like, the statue of, um, Fortuna, this personification, holding this, like, stick with a wheel on the end of it, and it goes back to, yeah, like, the idea of fortune and fate, that she would, like, take the wheel and just, like, spin it, and wherever it landed was what your fate would be, whether it's, like, positive or negative. It's just kind of comes by chance. um and so to them, that's kind of their idea of, like, a deity of chance, um like the villagers. um and so they spin the wheel, and, like, imprisonment and banishment is the protagonist's fate. It's just all by chance. And so, like, this capture my mind is, like, his, like, prayer of, like, him basically saying, hey, God, shit's really getting serious down here, like, do something. And I mean, how many times have we been in that situation throughout our lives, um, where that kind of becomes a prayer? Um, and, like, personally, at the time when I wrote this, like, I was dealing with all these problems with the woman I wanted to marry. And it's, sort of like I've said a million times before, it's not about her, but it's written because of her, that like, okay, I arrived from this like grave, so to speak, ready for a wedding, ready for good things to happen in my life. And I'm like, before any of that happened, it was like my hidden prayer of like, well, God, life kind of sucks. Will you do something good? Will you capture my heart? And then it happens through that suffering, through like bad things happening. Um, so yeah, it's the conclusion of just the protagonist and essentially me as well, saying like all this crazy crap is happening. Um, you know, it sucks. There's suffering involved, but you know, capture me over false gods and enemies. Kind of much like something you would almost find in Psalms, especially like the Davidic Psalms, where he's just like smite my enemies, like Lord capture my heart, all that. I mean, that's in the tone throughout Psalms, so it reflects that. But like I said, it's goes from like this kind of unserious beginning where it's like lack of belief that, oh, this is actually happening, to like, oh, it's happening, it's very serious all of a sudden. But then like turning around and saying, well, God, capture my heart, like you've got this, you're going to do something miraculous. And so you go back into that sort of um, less serious, less anxious sort of mentality. And that's where the song ends, because it's him recognizing in the middle that, hey, things have gotten really bad just all of a sudden like that. Now they want to throw me in prison. Um, but, you got this, God, and you're going to turn it around just like that, because surely that has to be your will, right? And that segues into the next song, because that's not how it goes at all. It doesn't get better. It actually gets really